changes, of course. And we have two choices of what we're talking about. The focus of the prompt is political and economic systems. And we can pick Asia or Africa, and I mentioned that this would be about Africa. And whenever you see a two-part key phrase like this, there's a clue that the easiest and kind of most straightforward way to organize the essay would be if one of those is a continuity and the other one is a change. In other words, I'll have a political continuity, economic change, or economic continuity, political change. So let's take a look at my brainstorm and see how that works out. Okay, so because it is a CCOT prompt, I organized in a timeline. So this box here represents my beginning, and then this would be my middle, and then my end over here. And because of the two-part key phrase, I went ahead and did a political section and an economic section. So I'm looking at, in 1900, European imperialism is still happening. And of course, the laws are created by Europeans and their culture is influencing Africa. The independence movements get going in the middle, and then by the end, they're all independent. And for economic, we have export economies in which, under imperialism, remember, the economies of Africa are based on enriching the home mother country. I chose to focus on 1950 in the middle and Europe still controlling, and that they're exporting to the colonies. I wanted to have different pieces of evidence, so I chose to talk about rubber here and cocoa and palm oil here. And then after their independence, they're still dependent on their exports. So you can probably see what this is kind of shaping up to be, which would be this over here is going to be a change, basically from being controlled by Europe to being independent. And then this down here can be my continuity, that even after independence, they are still dependent on exports. So now we're going to go to the next slide and see what that looks like as far as analysis. Okay, so this will be my political change from independence to European imperialism. And remember, this is a good way to write a change in a thesis or a topic sentence. If I just say, let's say I'm doing my thesis, and I've got my whole key phrase, and I say there was a political change, that is not specific enough. So I need to be more specific. And up here is kind of an example of what that might look like. So I have European imperialism in 1900. Remember how important it is with the CCOT to have dates for this evidence. So I have European imperialism, and my small y then is just why did Europeans control Africa? What was their goal in doing that back in 1900? Okay. Then with the independence movements, again, small y, why did they want their independence? And then in 2000, I have a mixture of military dictatorship, and so I can choose to focus on this for my small y. Why would they develop military dictatorships? It would be okay for me to choose to have it be why did they develop democracy if I wanted to. And if I had time, it would be great to do both of those. It would just enrich my analysis. So then my big Y, covering the whole 100-year period, is this focus on Europe losing control. Why did that process happen overall? And another way to think about this, in this small y, I'm saying why did they want their independence? And in my big Y, then I will be more practical perhaps and talk about why was it successful. And I could talk about global opinion, I could talk about the Cold War, I could talk about the collapse of European economies and political power after World War II. I could talk about colonies being inspired by the leadership of people like Gandhi. So those are all things to think about for my political change. This slide is my continuity, which remember was a dependence on foreign markets for Africa even despite their independence. So again, I've got these dates here. Circa, remember, means about, so I'm not saying exactly in 1950, but around that time. So I'm going to use exporting rubber as my 1900 example, and why was that? That's a practical. A lot of times with this economic stuff, you're going to be thinking about demand. Okay, why did people want to have rubber? Rubber does not grow in Europe, and it became increasingly important with industrialization, things like tires for cars, for instance. In 1950, I've got the exporting of palm oil, and I want to make sure that because I'm supporting this foreign dependence on foreign markets, that the palm oil is being exported to places like Europe. And again, why did they do that? And then I chose for a different piece of evidence cocoa. So that way I can have, different pieces of evidence that I'm talking about in each of those areas. So why export cocoa? And this is going to be a recurring topic for this, and I'm just going to talk about different products, okay? So then my big why is throughout the time, again, why did this continue? Why do they depend on foreign markets for development? And I want to stay away from demand because I've already dealt with that, hopefully, quite thoroughly in this first section of my analysis. So I don't want to talk about demand. I might talk about the strength of African economies, for instance. What is it about Africa's economies that makes them dependent and not independent? This is a horrible spelling, but you get the idea. So the strength of the African economies can be something that I focus on in terms of why they're dependent on foreign markets. And that way I'll have a different thing to talk about in this big Y than the small y. And remember, this is focused on the evidence, and this is focused on the skill, in this case, the continuity. So let's look at the last slide to see what the outline would look like in general. Okay, so here's an outline. I've got my continuity and my change. This is, what it's about. Remember, in the topic sentence, there's going to need to be a reason for each of those. And then you can see I've got my evidence outlined by date. Hope that helps your studying and preparation for this CCOT project.